I'm John Meehan. I'm the Head of Climate Adaptation and Mitigation, Essex County Council. And I'm speaking today because this is the beginning of National Tree Week. And that's really exciting for us because Essex has gone on a journey called the Essex Forest Initiative, which we started last year. And we have an intention of planting 375,000 trees over 5 years. And we've begun this progress now. And last year we planted, it was 38,000 trees. So we were ahead of our target. Our target was 25,000 trees. So we were 50% up on that. And this year our target is doubled. So we're now looking at 50,000 trees. And again, we think we're going to be ahead of that by 50%. So that is really great news. And I think the reason we're ahead of our targets is because there's a kind of groundswell of enthusiasm for tree planting from the public, from sponsors, from government through the Forestry Commission. So actually everyone's pushing in the same direction. So that's really, really exciting. And so I'm hoping that our 375,000 trees turns into 500,000 trees by the end of the 5 years, or even more. Let's be optimistic. Let's go for much more. And what's great is that we're not the only ones in Essex planting trees. All the districts and boroughs are putting their shoulder to the wheel. And some of them have got some really substantial tree planting targets. So for instance, Colchester and Chelmsford are kind of leading the way on the big numbers, but all of them, Harlow, Tendring, etc. And when you add up their tree target and our tree target, you get to 1 million trees, give or take. So that's fantastic news. And again, as we progress, I think what we're going to do is we're going to bang through that target of 1 million trees. Because every year, in fact, every month, every week, something changes in the tree world and there's another opportunity. So at the moment, we're doing a bid with Suffolk and Norfolk called Trees Call for Action. So we're going to work on an East Anglian basis to actually promote trees, to plan for trees, etc. So fantastic, time for trees. And of course, it's really essential and important because, the question is, why are we planting trees? Well, we're planting trees for many reasons. So biodiversity, obviously. We have lost huge amounts of hedges and woodlands over the last few centuries. Most of Essex was covered in woodland, a bit like Hainault Forest, Epping Forest and Hatfield Forest. They're the remnants of a huge forest that covered Essex, prior to the Normans arriving in 1066. And so now we're trying to put some of that back. And the reason we're trying to put some of that back is because of climate change. We have got a problem on a kind of global scale. We're getting much hotter and we're getting more erratic weather. We're getting much more floods as well. And so tree planting is part of the armory of trying to actually absorb water, for instance, through the leaf area, through the trees sucking water up, through them reducing the flow downstream. But they also have a function of cooling urban areas. We've got this thing called urban heat island effect in our cities and our towns, where it gets really hot with the sunshine during the day, and that heat carries on during the night as that concrete and brick and tarmac lets the heat out. But if you have a coat of tree planting, it keeps the pavements, the buildings cool. So that's a really good natural way of cooling our cities and reducing flooding. But in addition to that, there's all the other benefits of trees. And like I said, biodiversity is right up there because we have lost an awful lot of species, particularly insects in the last few decades. And by creating these natural wildlife areas like woodland, but also meadows and marshes, salt marshes, etc., there's a hope that we can actually restore those natural populations of birds, insects, plants, etc. The other really important thing for trees is that the Essex landscape used to have huge areas of elms, for instance, and they all went with Dutch elm disease. And currently we've got a problem with ash dieback. And so we haven't got the same landscape. So restoring that landscape is really important. And trees have a great role in actually screening off things you don't want to see, like some of the motorways and some of the ugly buildings, the edges of trading estates and so forth. So they have a landscape function. And then the final thing to say about the benefits of trees is that by creating woodland, you're creating space for people. And we found that really important in the COVID pandemic. You know, people needed to walk, needed to get out of the house, needed to exercise physically, and actually creating more woodlands, more what we call green infrastructure, natural green infrastructure, would really help with that. So that's the physical benefits of trees. But we also realized there's massive mental health benefits of trees, mental health benefits with greenery in general. So there's all sorts of research to say that if you drive to work on a tree-lined street, as opposed to one that's completely bleak, you're in a much better mental state by the time you get to work. You're much more euphoric, you're much more calm. So all the evidence is pointing to a green landscape is a good landscape for your mental health. So lots of reasons why we plant trees. And what trees are we planting? Well, in the main, we're planting native species to the UK. So oak, ash, hazel, beech, hornbeam, thorn, etc., etc. So all those native ones. But we're not completely sticking to that palette because of climate change. And actually, we're also experimenting with some species that we think will do much better in the new climate that we'll get. So we're looking at, in places, some Mediterranean trees that will be much better at coping with this. So you know, we've got to keep flexible because of the place we're in right now in terms of climate change. And so when do we plant? Well, you know, National Tree Week is the beginning of November, and the reason is that is the beginning of the tree planting season. So we plant in November, December, January, February, March. So kind of 4 months roughly. It's the end of November we start the planting, because in that time the trees are dormant and the young seedlings aren't sort of desperately trying to get water into their roots. So that during that dormant period they actually sort of just settle down in the ground once you've planted them. And actually there is some evidence to say they do a bit of root growth even though they haven't got leaves. And then come spring they burst into action. And we've had some fantastic successes last year, which was our first year of planting. We, Essex County Council, planted on the Chelmer River in Chelmsford. We planted 14,000 trees, and it was a wet woodland on the meadow. And we planted the nationally rare black poplar and also the nationally rare purple willow. And this year we've gone back and they were probably planted. We tend to plant small trees, what are called transplants or whips. So they're about 1 foot, 3 foot high. And the black poplar and the willow in particular, they were about 3 foot high. They're now about 9 foot. They've grown at the most extraordinary rate, which is fantastic for us looking after the site, because our trees will soon what's called closed canopy, and they'll all link together and there'll be a proper woodland. But it's also great from a carbon point of view. All that new wood is absorbing carbon from the atmosphere, which is absolutely fantastic. So we're delighted with what's happening at Chelmsford on the Chelmer Valley, and we're doing the same now in Harwich. We're going to plant another 14,000 trees, coincidentally on another wet meadow, which we're converting into wet woodland, and again with a similar palette of species of trees. So another great rare habitat. And in that case, we've got the nationally rare water voles nearby, so we're kind of looking after them and making sure that their habitats are safe as well. So who's paying for all this, I hear you ask? Well, you know, Essex County Council has decided this is a priority for them. And so they've put aside £500,000, and we are now getting that matched by external organisations, such as the Forestry Commission through its grant system, which is much more generous now in order to make things happen. The Woodland Trust have been fantastically generous with their More Wood scheme, and we're working with landowners and other districts and other boroughs and other councils to actually pay for roughly, it can be up to 90% of the cost of the tree planting. Because of their scheme and our scheme, we're making it really easy for landowners. And there are a whole bunch of other charities who are desperate to do something about global warming and tree planting. And so they're also funding the initiative. So, you know, trees are personally, you know, a fantastic treat in the landscape. And so sometimes I'm asked, you know, what are my favourite trees in Essex? And I've got a couple of sites that I'm really interested in. I live pretty close to Epping Forest. And Epping Forest is, I think, one of the largest collections of heritage trees in Europe. And in it are what are called pollards, where trees are topped at around about 2 meters tall. So they're above the browsing of animals. So it allowed the forest managers in the medieval times to allow pigs, deer, sheep to browse underneath, but not stop the wood growth above 2 meters. So these ancient pollards, because they're, you know, thousands of years old in some cases, populate the forest. And in some places you have coppice, which is where you don't have animals, and they're multi-stemmed from the base. And in one place, which is where my favourite trees are, there's a combination of coppices which have turned into pollards, and locals call them coppards. So they're beech trees, and they're completely gnarly and old and multi-stemmed. And then at 2 meters, they do the whole thing again, become multi-stemmed again. And they are the most remarkable trees I think you'll ever see in a natural landscape. So they're not far from Debden, if you're ever going out that way. They're in by a pond called the Lost Pond, aptly named because it's very difficult to find, so that's not really much help to you. The other trees I would mention are the ancient oak pollards at Thorndon Park, which is a country park on the outskirts of Brentwood. And at Thorndon North, if you wander around the woodlands there, you'll come across these most ancient, gnarly pollarded oaks. And as I say, they're multi-stemmed from about 2 or 3 meters, and they're fantastic feature trees in the landscape. So I think that's enough to be said about trees. We'll come back to the subject, I'm sure. They're incredibly popular. We are really excited about the Essex Forest Initiative. Like I say, we're planting more trees than we ever expected to, thanks to the support of corporates, charities, the government, and local people. We had a planting at Great Notley where we had 300 trees and 600 people turned up. You know, that's the enthusiasm we're facing at the moment. So it's great to be creating greenery for Essex, and we're delighted to do that, and we look forward to do it for many years to come. Thank you very much. Bye.